Welcome to the Press Progress Federal Leaders Debate 2025 live stream show, where your PressProgress.ca news team is going to be coming to you live before and after the English Federal Leaders Debate with in-depth commentary, analysis, and special guests, and featuring your friends from the Press Progress newsroom, Luc LeBrun in Ottawa, Stephen Magusiak in Calgary, Eric Wickham in Toronto, and Emma Arkell in Vancouver. I'm Unrigged Community Director and Harbinger Executive Director Andre Goulet in Montreal. Press Progress, as viewers of this stream might already know, is an award-winning nonprofit news organization focused on uncovering the news through original, investigative, and explanatory journalism, serving readers a brand of journalism unafraid to ask critical questions, confront injustice, impact real-world change, and uphold responsible journalistic standards. We're excited to be coming to you live tonight with an exciting lineup. Stay tuned for my conversation with Press Progress editor Luc LeBrun coming up in just a few minutes. And later we'll be hearing from Ontario reporter Eric Wickham and the Hatchet's Arshy Mann as we lean into the historic 2025 federal election English language debate. And stay tuned for post-debate reaction with Stephen Magusiak, Emma Arkell, and guests. But first, behind the scenes tonight is Press Progress publisher and live stream producer Romy Garrido in Calgary. She's making sure the stream streams so smoothly. Romy, tell us a little more about what viewers can expect tonight on the stream.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here, and thanks, Andre. So tonight you can expect for some in-depth analysis pre-debate, which you're watching right now, and then we will take a pause to actually watch the debate itself, which we're expecting to be about 2 hours, and then after that, we will be signing back on to do some analysis and commentary and reaction of what we saw. We've got also a really great lineup of guests along with our awesome reporters, so you should expect to see our team, including Luc LeBrun, our editor, Stephen Magusiak, Alberta reporter, Eric Wickham, Ontario reporter, Emma Arkell, Labour reporter, and of course, Andre will be taking us throughout the night. And I'll just run through the guests because I'm super excited about them. We're going to hear from Arshy Mann from Hatchet Media, Ricardo Acuña from the Parkland Institute, Claire Ross from Pivot, Savannah Stewart from the Rover, and finally ending the night, Luc and Jonathan Goldsbie will be taking the stage to do a little bit of reaction. But I don't want to spoil anything, so I'll just leave it there.
So much excitement, maybe a few surprises. And just for viewers, like, this is a cozy night. We're kind of hanging out before the debate begins, laying the table for what maybe to expect in the debate, talking a little bit about the federal election campaign so far with the team from Press Progress. So Romy, thank you very much for being the exceptional producer in the background. And we'll be talking to you a little bit later.
Sounds good. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. And now, coming to join us from Ottawa, Ontario, is Luc LeBrun. Luc, welcome to the stream. You're on mute, unfortunately. Can you unmute yourself? You're.
Sorry, that my bad. That was okay. Sorry, I thought that was a technical error. Getting off to a really bad start. Right?
No, not at all. Not at all. This is something that we've all experienced in our lives. Luc, how's your election so far?
Exhausting. It's a very exhausting election, especially after the Ontario election that had just happened a month earlier. We're having a lot of elections in 2025 so far, and we're only, what, 1/3 of the way through?
No kidding. I totally forgot that. Right. So you guys have been like running this whole time, as well as putting on the Progress Summit last week in Ottawa. So that's a lot. Okay. Well, luckily, we don't have to do the hard work tonight. We're just talking about it because there's 5 people, including Steve Paikin, on stage tonight sweating bullets because they have to do their very best trying to shake things up in this election. So tonight, the 4 major party leaders are showing up at Maison Radio-Canada in Montreal. The stakes are high. And to me, it seems clear that the trade war, the 51st state annexation threat, and a general sense of instability and maybe even fear have been really driving support toward Mark Carney's Liberals in this campaign so far. So, well, Pierre Poilievre attempts to take the Conservatives back to power with the highest polling that party's seen in more than a decade. Meanwhile, the eminently competent Yves-François Blanchet is attempting to keep a significant bloc cohort in the House of Commons, and NDP's Jagmeet Singh is frankly floundering, which is kind of a bummer. But to be honest, he was really excellent in last night's French language federal leaders debate, I thought. So this evening, Luke, what are you watching for on stage?
Well, I think that clearly Mark Carney is the front runner. So as a result, all attention will be on Mark Carney. Everyone will be attempting to knock Mark Carney off of his game, knock him off of his message. We saw a little bit of that last night with the French debate. It was striking to me, I thought, that so much of the focus obviously was on Mark Carney, but as a result, Pierre Poilievre was kind of absent through most of it. So I think that'll be interesting. I will wonder if the same dynamic plays out tonight, if Pierre Poilievre will be as invisible as he was the night before. I mean, at least invisible by Pierre Poilievre's standards, because he does have a tendency to make himself the center of attention. And I just didn't really see that so much last night. I don't know if that was due to his French language skills, or if there was a strategic reason for that. Maybe he's keeping his powder dry for the English debate. I'm not quite sure.
We're definitely gonna see tonight. But my observations from yesterday evening's debate were, so Poilievre's been having like paid French lessons since he entered the House of Commons 22 years ago. So his French is pretty good. He speaks with an accent, whatever. But he sticks to. Last night, he stuck to his same boilerplate, which is like free market fundamentalism, pipelines. And the Quebecois friend I was watching with last night kind of gasped involuntarily and shook her head, because it's like, this is not going to fly in Quebec. There's not a lot of people in Quebec who are actually going to be super pro pipeline. So it seemed like a weird strategy. He didn't get a lot of chance to bully people. I don't know if it's because it was a second language or what. And then Carney over on stage left was kind of low key and even a little boring, which I think is kind of his strategy, because the less he rocks the boat, the more I think he can like maintain his level of support. So that was interesting to see. Jagmeet Singh was really dynamic last night, and I was really impressed because he hasn't had, I think, any chance to shine, because the spotlight has not been on him in the last several weeks. So it was kind of heartwarming. I think he'll be bringing a lot of energy to the stage tonight and kind of throwing it all in the ring, right? And of course, Yves-François Blanchet is a superb communicator, a great orator, and because it was his first language, he really owns the space when he wanted to. So yeah, tonight it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also looking forward to seeing more press progress coverage in the coming 12 days of this campaign. You guys have had some really great stories in the last few weeks, and I want to chat about a couple of them before we move on to our first interview with our first guest. So can you tell viewers a little bit about the story that you broke on the Signal conspiracy? What was going on with this Signal chat?
Sure, yeah. So there's a candidate in Ontario, southwestern Ontario, by the name of Andrew Lawton. Andrew Lawton is a former right-wing talk radio host. He was for a time on Rebel Media. He hosted a podcast there. Most recently, he's been a personality on the right-wing media website True North. He was also, as it happens, Pierre Poilievre's personal biographer. He wrote a book about Pierre Poilievre. And now he's running for the Conservatives. So he's made the transition from, whatever you want to call True North to running for office for the Conservatives. And what I get into in my story, so this is about a Signal group chat. For those who are not familiar with what Signal is an encrypted chat app. It's kind of like WhatsApp or something like that, except it's a little more secure. And so this is a group chat that involves about over 50 people. And in this group chat were the leaders of the Freedom Convoy, so people like Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, also the convoy lawyers lawyers associated with this organization called the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, who have been funding many of the criminal defenses of many of the convoy characters who have been charged. And they were representing the Freedom Convoy leaders at the Emergencies Act inquiry. So the lawyers who were the representatives at the inquiry set up this group chat, and it basically appears that they were attempting to coordinate their messages with dozens and dozens of these right-wing media personalities and far-right social media influencers, podcasters, even just random Twitter users who have fairly large accounts and some sway amongst the convoy audiences, so to speak. And if you really get into what they were doing in this group chat, they were frequently kind of brainstorming ideas and bouncing ideas off of one another. They were trying to figure out messages about, basically how to play down the rougher edges of the Freedom Convoy, and then also how to present themselves in a more flattering light. So these are the kinds of messages that you would find in this group chat. And Andrew Lawton, to bring this back to the guy whose name is on the ballot right now, he was one of the more active members of this group. There's examples where he actually, so one of the convoy lawyers suggested, wanted to see a video clip from the inquiry go out, and made this request along with suggested language about how to describe this thing. And Andrew Lawton says, on it. 15 minutes later on True North, you see the exact video that was requested by this lawyer with the exact language suggested by this lawyer. And Andrew Lawton says, here you go. And the lawyer says, thank you, sir. So this is the kind of thing that you find in this group chat. And basically what it is showing is a certain level of coordination between the Freedom Convoy leaders and the lawyers, but also the, these right-wing media personalities and these strange Twitter accounts that you might not think twice about, but it seems like at least 50 of them are all in this group chat talking amongst each other.
And reading some of the excerpts that you have from the group chat, the screenshots, it's like a nightmare group chat. I would hate to be there. And just to read one, Benita Peterson, an energetic convoy organizer, confirmed being in the group chat, describing it as a terrific way to get organized and share information. I love being part of group chats, Peterson told Press Progress. I guess one of the challenges I have is that I'm part of too many group chats. So maybe that's something that the left and the right have in common. And I do want to note too that it seems like there's 3 books published in Poilievre this year. One is a hagiography from the new Conservative candidate Lawton. One is Mark Bourie's new book Ripper, which I'm looking forward to reading, and Martin Lukács's excellent The Poilievre Project, available now from Breach Books. Great. Okay, so people can find that recent investigative report from Luke at PressProgress.ca. Another story I wanted to check in about, though, was the one about CTV canceling Rachel Gilmore, a segment they had hired her for, because that was kind of a big deal, and it was like all over socials and everyone was talking about it. So you covered that, Luke. Tell us a little bit more about that story.
Right. So Rachel Gilmore, who I don't believe requires any introduction because everyone is surely aware of who Rachel Gilmore is. Rachel was hired to do a weekly segment for CTV Your Morning. So CTV Your Morning is kind of like Canada's answer to Good Morning America or something like that. Canada, it's a morning show, right? Yeah. So every Friday, the idea was that Rachel Gilmore was going to come on and do this Fact Check Friday segment where she dissects a piece of misinformation that is floating around during the election period. And so after the first episode or the first segment, there was a pretty strong reaction amongst the right-wing people on X, the Everything app. And as you can imagine, Rachel has a pretty large following of trolls and people who are frankly just obsessed with her. So
she is your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. Yes,
exactly. And so what happened was there was so Pierre Poilievre's former spokesperson, he has since been reassigned, but Pierre Poilievre's former spokesperson, Sebastian Skamsky, was kind of the one who sort of got the ball rolling here. He tweeted in a shocking new low for CTV News, they are having this disgraced disinformation peddler lie directly to their viewers under the guise of news. The liberal media will do anything to ensure a fourth liberal term. So, basically implying that Rachel Gilmore is somehow directly working with the liberals as well as CTV, I guess is the implication there. This sparked this sort of set off all of those people who normally do get outraged and angry about these kinds of things. And what ended up happening was that, basically a week later, Rachel got a phone call from the executive producer of CTV Your Morning, and this executive producer basically told Rachel, I empathize with what you're going through. It sucks. I get it, but we didn't realize just how big the backlash was going to be. So for that reason, we've made the decision to cancel the entire segment.
I want to just quote McLean here from your piece, what she wrote to Rachel. I'm sure you're well aware of the pushback we received after your first appearance on the show. There's a phone call, not even an email. The tricky thing for me is it just ends up being a distraction from what we're trying to do. The who we're talking to is kind of drowning out the what we're talking about right now. I don't feel like we have the bandwidth to deal with it, which kind of sounds like a breakup call, which it was. And so that's kind of gutting because Rachel does really courageous work where she puts herself in the line of fire, right? So for a major institution like CTV, which has a lot of legacy, a lot of strength, or it should, having them cave was it was creepy. It was bad. So it was really
actually it's almost worse than that too, because Rachel is someone who was kind of elevated and presented by the news industry as example of the kind of harassment that journalists face. Rachel has been invited to journalism schools to talk about what she's dealing with. She was invited to the unveiling of this initiative that was sponsored by a number of different news organizations, including CTV News, about how to sort of a training manual, more or less, for newsroom leaders about how to support your workers in your newsroom when they're facing this kind of harassment. Additionally, she received awards to recognize the kind of the courage that she's showing in face of these kinds of attacks. And in spite of all of this, CTV is kind of like, well, we knew you had to deal with this stuff, but at the end of the day, we don't want to deal with it because we don't have the quote unquote bandwidth. So it really does just sort of, it's pretty awful.
In a moment where journalists who want to follow the Poilievre campaign have to pay their own way and drive from the hotel to get over to his campaign, like his campaign is not being covered in a traditional way whatsoever, and that's been weird because it's just an extra level of control that we haven't seen in Canadian politics before. And then the other thing is those two things I think are just really fundamental. Oh, and the third thing is last night at the post French language debate, the scrum or whatever, Rebel News kind of took over the show and they lined up and they got a ton of questions, which is very bad because Rebel is hot garbage. What was your reaction as someone who's been in the business for a decade, hearing that Rebel was really in the front line, getting to ask the leaders multiple questions?
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, this has been an ongoing battle that they've been fighting for over half a decade now. So in 2019, they got an emergency injunction to allow them to cover the debate. In 2021, they also went to court. I think people need to understand, if they're not aware, that basically Rebel and True North have gone to court and gotten court orders to force the leaders' debate commission to let them into these events. And what happened last night was that the commission introduced a new rule saying that each news organization gets one question each. They can assign one reporter to ask one question at the post-debate scrum. And so basically what Rebel said, and to be fair, they kind of have a bit of a point here. They basically point out, well, Post Media, for example, they have the Ottawa Citizen, they have the National Post, they have the Calgary Herald. They're allowed to assign, a dozen different reporters, Montreal Gazette, from all these different newspaper brands that they own. But it's kind of doesn't make any difference because at the end of the day, they're all owned by the same company. So their point was, why do these conglomerates get to get to ask multiple questions, but Rebel doesn't? And then they made the argument that, well, we have one person in BC in our BC bureau, we have one person in Alberta in our Alberta bureau. We have a Rebel Canada National Bureau. So they made the argument that they have multiple divisions within the Rebel media, I don't know, super entity or whatever. And so they basically threatened the debate commission and told them that they would take them to court for a third time. And they have gone to court twice before and have won both times. So I think the debate commission just felt that they didn't want to lose another legal battle against Rebel Media and Ezra Levant. And they basically just, gave in and let them do it. So interestingly, they basically got, I think it's kind of funny because their complaint was that they're getting fewer questions than these other outlets. In the end, it turned out that Rebel by a, country mile had more questions than anybody else. I think I saw it was about a quarter of the questions were all asked by Rebel. And then in addition to Rebel, there were a couple of other right-wing outlets that got to ask questions too. So yeah.
A country mile, by the way, is like a much longer mile than a normal mile. This is a folksy stream. We're going to be having folksy idioms all night long. And I want to just point out that the kind of way that Post Media dilutes news by making it right wing, but like it performs as normal, or it performs as centrist. So when my mother subscribes to the Montreal Gazette, Mom, if you're watching, we've talked about this before, but like it's just like people are being soft served right-wing news. So I guess it makes me happy that like Press Progress does spectacular work, that you guys are still around after 11 years, and that in year 11, you are experimenting with live streaming and other kinds of media. So yeah, it's really good to be here tonight and really exciting. Really quickly before we get to our transition segment, before Eric comes on with Arshy, tonight's the night, Luke, that it's the last chance for leaders to land the mythical knockout punch pundits dream about. But this almost never happens. Can you think of the 2 times where there was a shocking thing that actually happened in the debate?
Do you have an answer for this?
I do.
Okay.
It was 1984 when.
Well, hold on.
Yeah?
I was going to say, I mean, there was I'm thinking maybe it was 88, but maybe this is what you're about to say. So it was the debate between Brian Mulroney and John Turner and Ed Broadbent. But there was that really intense exchange between Turner and Mulroney, where basically Mulroney kind of has that like one-liner about how he's doing nation building, and
you had an option,
and how
sir.
you can rip up the NAFTA agreement with 3 days notice.
Okay, so we're thinking of 2 different things. In 88, that happened, but in 84, the one that people always talk about is Mulroney was bullying Turner because Turner didn't deny Pierre Trudeau's what do you call it? Like the gifts to people, the patronage appointments. And he said, "You had an option, sir." And that just roasted Turner and changed the tenor of the election. The other one, though, that I was thinking was Jack Layton in 2011. What did he say to Michael Ignatieff that shook Ignatieff to the core and kind of tilted that election towards the orange wave?
My brain is not accessing that memory. What is it? What? Tell me. What is it?
Ignatieff had the worst attendance record of any MP in the Commons. And so Jack said, most Canadians, if they don't show up for work, they don't get a promotion. Luke, who says Canadian politics is boring with zingers like that in our debates? We're going to see a lot of fun tonight, too. Luke LeBrun is in Ottawa. Luke, thanks for speaking with us, and we will have you back later in the show.
Thank you so much, Andre. And before I go, I want to give a quick shout out to the Magusiak, the extended Magusiak family, who I understand are tuned in and are like watching with great interest tonight.
Thank you, Luke. And yes, it's a family-friendly show. Families welcome. It's a folksy show. Luke LeBrun in Ottawa. Thanks, Luke. And bringing back now a Press Progress publisher, Romy Garrido in Calgary. Romy, it's a folksy stream. It's a family stream, but it's also a stream that's advertising a little bit of the work Press Progress does and kind of letting people know about what kinds of initiatives you guys are rolling out in 2025. This live stream is one of them. The almost factory-like approach to exceptional investigative journalism is another. But you guys are also rolling into the place where the youth are, the place where younger people are getting their news. Where's that?
Yeah, we are definitely trying to diversify our coverage. So Press Progress has been around for about 10 years. I don't know if folks know that. And for the majority of that time, we've been doing investigative, explanatory news online, written on the website. And so in the last couple of years, in the last decade, the newsroom has evolved a lot, but especially in the last couple of years, we've brought in some new talent, namely Ramneek Johal, who is our BC reporter and associate editor. She is on mat leave, which is why she's not joining us tonight. But she took on the project of trying to start TikTok coverage for us. So we have basically been, as you see here, trying to do a little bit of coverage of our stories.
And so you're hiring models. You're not having your journalists do this, actually? No, I'm sorry. I'm looking closer. That's Eric Wickham. You're Ontario. You're Ontario Jones. And there's Ramneek, yes.
And there's Ramneek, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, we're taking our stories and doing video coverage of them. Long story short. Mm-hmm. So yes, there is the awesome Ramneek, who we miss dearly, but we're looking forward to having her back soon. And I do have an exciting thing to talk about. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to mention here, Andre.
Well, just that I had heard rumor that you guys will be launching a baby version of Press Progress featuring her baby as the lead journalist. when she comes back. No? Okay.
No, not quite.
That's the exciting thing. But yes, this is, hey, is that Boots?
That is Steve Boots. So
let's take a moment here. What's he doing here?
Our largest trading partner, and it has caused huge disruptions across a number of industries already. These tariffs are very likely going to cause.
Doing a great job. So Steve has basically joined us to do some special federal election coverage with us on TikTok. So he's going to be taking some of our best federal stories over the next couple of weeks, taking them to TikTok for us with some great production value. So we're really excited to be partnering with him. He's great. And so that was Steve Boots on screen there.
Great TikToks, great toque. And this is exciting because, this is a medium where Press Progress should be, and it should be reaching new viewers, and doing a great job is exceptional. Wonderful. Romy, thanks for sharing that with us, and we will talk to you later in the stream.
Sounds good. See you soon.
Okay. Bringing you now to Toronto, Ontario, capital of the nation, is Eric Wickham live in his home studio. Eric Wickham, I'm so sorry I mistook you for a model on that TikTok video.
Don't be sorry, Andre. Please don't be sorry. Hello to the Magusiak family, by the way.
Yes, it's so nice they're watching. I think there's a lot of family watching tonight, although it must be noted that this is a family-friendly live stream. Eric, you're going to be speaking with Arshy Mann in just a minute, but before we get there, how's your election been?
Oh, I love elections. We all love elections. Nobody's tired. Everyone's excited. We didn't just get through a previous election 2 months ago. It's good. There's always stories with elections. I am not looking for any extra work these days. It's been an interesting one. You can't say it hasn't been interesting. I feel like we haven't talked a whole bunch of policy, though. I feel like there's,
Well, I hope, I'm assuming you and Arshy are going to talk a little bit about what to expect in tonight's debate. So I'm going to bring in Arshy and check out. Will you guys have a conversation? Welcome to Arshy Mann, who's in Toronto, and Eric, I'll leave you to it.
Okay, great. Hey, Arshy, sorry for the ambush intro there.
Oh, not a problem. Happy to be here.
So for the folks at home who are not familiar with Arshy Mann, the co-founder of a podcast called The Hatchet, could you give us like a little quick elevator pitch for The Hatchet, just so they can be checking it out?
Yeah, sure. The Hatchet's a podcast and newsletter on Substack devoted to kind of exposing power and money in Canada. And so we do a lot of different coverage. We've covered a lot of stories that I think don't necessarily make it into the mainstream press. Right now, we're in the middle of a series on Brookfield, which is probably something that's going to come up in the debates tonight. And honestly, it's become this kind of like election ping pong, right? The Liberals defending it and the Conservatives and the NDP attacking. But I don't think most Canadians actually understand what might very well be the most powerful company in Canada. It kind of operates outside of scrutiny a lot of the time. So we're going through some of the history of that, as well as, why this company matters so much beyond just this election context. But obviously, we are talking about that as well.
Fantastic. And this is going to be a multi-part series. So how many episodes are we expecting on Brookfield?
Right now, it's looking like it's going to be 4, but nice. Things can change. We initially thought 3, and then partway through our first episode, we're like, there's too much here, chop it up. So yeah, it's subject to change, but right now it looks like 4.
Listen, I'd be happy with 12. You've done some other coverage as well on the federal election, including the somewhat turbulent campaign of the Conservatives. Can you tell us a bit about that episode, some of the details, and what has gone wrong for the Conservatives up until this moment?
Yeah, I mean, we were putting that out right when Corey Teneycke, Doug Ford's kind of campaign manager, was really attacking the Poilievre campaign and the tactics that they'd undertaken. And it really does seem there is, in some ways, a split within the Conservative Party about how to approach things. I mean, to kind of, encapsulate it, I think you have Poilievre and Jenny Byrne's camp, which initially came in trying to run the same election, I think, that they would have run against Trudeau. But obviously, Trump, the American threat, has really changed things, as well as the resignation of Trudeau and the entry of Mark Carney. Now, I do think you've seen some shifts from the Conservative campaign over the last little bit about how to approach presenting Poilievre, whether or not they kind of keep the aggressive tone that they had, how to talk about Trump. And I do think it should be said that, Poilievre's doing quite well in the polls for not just for a Conservative candidate. He's polling above what most Conservatives usually get in a federal election. It's just that, the left vote, the NDP vote, has really collapsed and moved towards the Liberals. Now we are seeing some tightening in the polls, so we'll see how that kind of plays out. And tonight, I think, is going to be a really big determiner in some ways of how the rest of this campaign shapes out. I mean, obviously. So I'm really excited to watch, both for the kind of theatrics of it all, but especially on some of the substance, because we really haven't gotten, frankly, too much, despite the fact everyone's saying that this election's very, very important. And I agree with that. And nobody seems to really be talking policy in a very detailed, deep way.
Right. No, I'm glad you bring that up, because I think the first week of this campaign was, who's the Trump candidate? Not me, right? We have, there are plenty of issues that Canadians are facing right now, whether that's, the cost of living, a tough job market, climate change, threats of annexation, economic instability, and the threat of rising fascism across the world. Given the stakes of this election, why have so many parts of it been so silly?
I think a lot of it has to do with the kind of philosophy behind modern election campaigning in Canada. It's much more about not screwing up, about making sure that your message gets through, about quote unquote winning the day. And that can make it difficult to have substantive conversations. There's a reason we haven't really seen platforms from these parties. We're like a week and a half out, and we don't really know what's in the platform, which is ridiculous if you think about it. Going into this debate, all of that stuff should be out there, if for no other reason than the moderator can ask questions about it. The Liberals are planning to release their platform this weekend. I'm not totally sure about the Conservatives or the NDP, but it's very silly. And so, when you have that kind of a vacuum, the media ends up talking about the stupidest things imaginable, like this button situation, right? Like, oh my God, give me a break. Literally, Donald Trump has been threatening to annex us. The global economy is in turmoil, and we're talking about some staffers like doing a stupid prank. It's dumb on all sides.
Absolutely. And like the fact that nobody has, or that parties don't feel pressured to put out their platforms is a huge problem for reporters, but also the public as well. I remember just this provincial election. I know it's hard to think back to 2 months ago at this point, but they didn't release their platform until a week to go in the election, right? Like how are we supposed to be doing our jobs? How are we supposed to be holding people accountable if they're not giving us the information? Right.
100%. And they're also doing all these softball interviews. That's much more the trend now. So you saw Mark Carney do Scott Galloway, right? Like you saw, Pierre Poilievre do some interviews with some podcasters as well. And again, I have nothing against podcasting. That's literally my stock in trade. But they're clearly approaching individuals that they know are going to not necessarily challenge their assumptions, that are going to have a kind of softer conversation. And that's pretty sad in a lot of ways. You see Mark Carney defending the CBC publicly. Why doesn't he do a sit-down interview with the CBC, right? Like, why don't all the candidates do that at least? Because this is our public broadcaster. But then also, I think they should be out there more. I don't know. I don't think it's good for democracy overall. And frankly, even in this election, I found initially people were, I think, very into it. I'm seeing a little bit more apathy again, which is much more typical for a Canadian federal election. And I find that surprising because of just, how enormous the stakes are.
Right. Well, maybe Carney needs to do like another Daily Show appearance and,
exactly. Right. I mean, what a good example.
So, I mean, I keep bringing up the provincial election, and maybe that's just because, that's how I started my time here. It was like 2 days into my first week, they dropped the writ. And of course, I'm already on my second election. So I'm a seasoned veteran at this point. But like this election feels so different to the provincial election. What is actually different? Is this just like optics, or is there something deeper at play here?
I think there's a strong opposition here. The Ontario opposition parties, the Ontario NDP, the Ontario Liberals, frankly, they just don't have the muscle in order to stand up and make a case against Doug Ford's PCs. I thought it was a quite pathetic showing on both parties in terms of just being able to get their message out or crafting a vision for the province. It all felt kind of limp. And so I think the difference here is that Mark Carney has a ton of support. There's a lot of enthusiasm around him, and so does Pierre Poilievre. Like I said, Pierre Poilievre's doing quite well in the polls. His base is quite enthusiastic. There's a huge section of this country that really is gunning for him to win. And so I do think that makes things a little bit different. And again, the Trump annexation stuff, the economic turmoil, all of that, I think, does add into it. That, it might sound a little bit contradictory because a minute ago I was saying that people are apathetic, but I do think in terms of the perception, like when you're engaging with this election through the media, having two pretty viable candidates, somebody, Poilievre was leading in the polls even a few months ago at like 45%, and now you have similar numbers for Carney, that changes the dynamic significantly.
Mm-hmm. So given the state of the campaign on the Conservative side, the conflict internally, as well as candidates getting removed and others staying on, kind of to the surprise of the public, is there something that can happen in this debate that can actually help the Conservatives prove to the public that they can form government? Is there a set or a sequence of words that Poilievre can say that will win the day?
I've never been a huge believer that some zinger is what's going to change things. I mean, I know right before we jumped on here, there was mention of the 2011 debate with Jack Layton kind of digging into Ignatieff, and obviously these things can change the dynamics. But I'm more interested in are any of these candidates putting out a feasible vision, something that's understandable for how they would actually do things in government. And so, I think that is going to be a challenge on all sides. For Poilievre, in particular, I mean, I guess he has to come off a little bit more likable, maybe. Like, I think I watched the French language debate yesterday. I think he did a fine enough job. He's quite obviously comfortable in French. I'm not, so I was watching it in translation. So, take my opinion there with a grain of salt. But, I expect him to dig into Mark Carney, especially. It'll be interesting to see if he throws any bones to Jagmeet Singh. I mean, the Conservatives have been quite aggressive against the NDP, especially before this election. That's really hurting them now because they need the NDP voters to either stay home or vote NDP and not vote Liberal. So, it's going to be an interesting dynamic. But again, I want to see, there's been some shifts, say, with Poilievre. What does he emphasize here? He's singing a slightly different tune, say, on the CBC now. Still want to defund it, but it's not in the first 100 days. There's no timeline, etc. Is that something that he emphasizes or kind of moves away from? I'm obviously also going to be watching for whether or not Brookfield, the issues of tax havens, some of these things that I spent a lot of time thinking about and covering come up. I'm shocked that tax havens are an election issue, but of course, none of the candidates and the media, frankly, know how to talk about it. Everyone's talking about loopholes and talking about enforcement. The problem is that both Liberal and Conservative governments have legalized the use of tax havens through tax treaties with predatory jurisdictions like Barbados and Bermuda. And, I would like to hear the candidates kind of address that because it's a very easy thing in some ways to fix. I doubt that is necessarily going to happen. So it's going to be interesting to see. But again, I'd urge people to step back from the theatrics a tiny bit, watch for the policy and see is there a believable vision here? Because all sides are kind of saying nonsense at times. The NDP is only talking about healthcare now, right? Like Jagmeet Singh is just, you ask him a question about climate change, he'll bring it back to healthcare. You ask him a question about the U.S., it'll be like, what makes us different from the U.S.? Healthcare. Mark Carney, some of his visions are very strange. You have him talking about operational versus capital budgets. I'm sorry, but that's just not how kind of federal budgeting works. It's a little trick that he's kind of playing. He's also mentioned at times that in Canada, we'll produce our own cars, entirely Canada made. You're going to need to flesh that out for me because I don't know how you would do that. I'm pretty sure that is not going to work, right? So that's what I'm going to be looking for.
Right. Or we'll just do the Yugo, but in Windsor,
Yeah.
I really like that point about bringing the conversation outside of political theater. Yeah. Do you see a way of making that happen? How do we get politicians to talk about the things that matter to us, that affect us as working people?
Oh God, if I knew, I'd be trying to do it. I mean, I'm hopeful that the debate format will help a little bit. I'm not the biggest Steve Paikin fan in the world, I'll say, but I do think having, he does focus in on policy. I think not having 5 different moderators and making the debate about, the media organization that's presenting it, I think is good. And so perhaps that will help. I don't know. It's a hard thing because, the way the modern media environment and the way kind of electoral politics operates now makes it difficult to have substantive conversations. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying. I am hoping, yes, especially on economic visions, to have more substance here. And for some of the moderators to push back too, like going back to cars in the French language debate yesterday, Jagmeet Singh also just said something that really threw me. Like, we're going to introduce legislation that if you want to sell cars in Canada, you have to have a factory here. Like, there's 5 automakers in Canada. That's it, right? Like, I mean, there's a few electrical ones that are a bit different, but you're just saying like no Korean cars at all, right? Like nobody can own a Kia or a Hyundai. Like, that's a pretty big shift. I would like some interrogation when they just throw these things out there. I understand that they didn't want to give that much, they were trying to keep equal time, but stuff like that really throws me, and I hope the moderator will jump on it.
Awesome. Well, Arshy, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you again for joining me on my first live stream as the Ontario reporter. Where can people
find the job, Eric?
Well, you know me, I just was so persistent that they had to hire me.
Yep.
But yeah, where can people find you?
So if you want to find us, take a look at hatchetmedia.substack.com or look up the Hatchet in your podcast apps. We'll have an episode out tonight after the debates. And yeah, thank you again so much for having me on. And I hope everyone gets something out of the debates tonight.
Arshy and Eric, I just want to throw in before we say bye to Arshy that when you're talking about the how many people vote, the turnout. The high watermark in the last 25 years was 1993 with 70%. We more routinely get like 62%, but you got to go back to Diefenbaker and Lester B. Pearson for it to be up to like 79. So even Trudeau mania in the late 60s was like 76%. So yeah, we have a different political culture now where people prefer to not vote. And I think that's interesting. Arshy Mann in Toronto, thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. All right. Good luck, guys.
Thank you, Arshy. Arshy Mann is one of the best podcasters in the country, by the way.
Are you kidding? He's the best. He is the best. Can I say that?
Well, I think it's a bold claim, but I would not disagree with you. Everyone should subscribe to The Hatchet on Substack.
Yes. And Eric, we're now going to just have a few minutes to chat with our good friend Luc LeBrun, bringing him back on for just a few minutes as we kind of lean towards the kickoff of this historic election. Luc, I don't know if you caught me saying the turnout was kind of the 60s through like in the 60s through the last 20 years, and it was 1993 when we last had 70%. And so I guess I'm wondering from you guys, to what do we owe people, like a large minority of people not voting?
Well, I think one factor that I have been noticing, I mean, with Facebook banning news on its platform, it is harder to get news about election and to stay engaged about what's going on in your democracy. And it's interesting because if you look at voter turnout, it was actually spiking up. It was like trending upwards like through the 2010s. And then in the last couple elections, like in Ontario, and then in Ontario, when was that? 2022, and then the most recent Ontario election, it's been trending downwards, right? So I think that might have something to do with it, especially on some of these, like a provincial election where you don't have as many, maybe not as many media outlets who are covering the election as opposed to a national election where there's maybe more resources. So I think that's part of it. There's probably several factors, but
I think also managed campaigns and like, Poilievre is doing a pretty good grassroots push. It's just that the people's values suck. Sorry, that's rude, but you know what I mean. So yeah, managed campaigns and like lack of accessibility to people being involved in politics. Eric, what would you owe it to?
The low voter turnout.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a number of things. I think a lot of people just don't feel like there's someone that represents them, right? I think that is something that unfortunately keeps people away. If someone doesn't see a compelling vision of what country they would like to live in, as an option at the ballot box, I don't think they're going to show up to it. And so like it's a sad state of affairs. You want people to be showing up to vote, but you can't get mad at people if they don't feel compelled by the options in front of them. Correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we also see that people's votes are wasted in a lot of the ridings around the country because who you vote for is not actually going to make a difference. Luc, thoughts?
My thoughts on whether voting. I mean, I guess maybe the counterpoint to that would be that some people call for a proportional system of voting, which would not, I think it would definitely address that feeling that your vote does not count.
Have we ever seen a Canadian politician actually push for that, like in our lifetimes or in recent history? Eric, have we ever seen someone have that kind of courage?
Well, there was a guy that used it as a campaign promise a couple of years ago. I can't
Did he ever
remember
run for prime minister? Did he ever run for prime minister?
I think he did. I think he won a couple times actually.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know where that project went.
Where it went and where we're going is a good question. We're going to be finding out in about 12 days. And this debate is going to help give us a roadmap to what the next 12 days are going to look like. What are you guys, we've talked about this before, but like, not what are we looking for, but do you think we're going to come out the other side with any surprises?
Luke?
No, I do not think there are going to be any surprises that come out of this election, out of the debate. I mean, I think a lot of people tune into debates just to get a feel for the different candidates. I think that's kind of what people are looking for in these debates. They're not necessarily looking for, I don't think there's going to be a moment that's going to change everybody's minds.
Yeah, I think Luke is correct in that. I think a lot of people either show up just wanting to see the candidate that they've already like gotten behind, and if they're undecided, I don't know if it's going to be the debate that is going to be the deciding thing, the deciding factor for them. But I don't know, perhaps.
I don't know. You heard it here first. What are, just really quick for viewers before they start looking to get their CBC or CTV app set up for screening the debate, what we have coming up in our back half is a post-debate analysis, and we're going to be having the rest of the Press Progress team joining us, the ones that are more in the West. So that's Steve Magusiak in Calgary. Shout out to his family, who are if they're watching, and Emma Arkell in Vancouver. Steven's going to be speaking with Ricardo Acuña, who is part of the Parkland Institute, which is a think tank in Edmonton that's been around for a long time, and they do exceptional work. They'll be giving a bit of like a prairie perspective, and specifically an Alberta perspective. Arkell is going to be in Vancouver, but she's going to be interviewing two Montreal journalists. Savannah Stewart, the managing editor of the Rover, which is an investigative journalism organization that does exceptional work in Montreal, focusing on the crisis of housing, Indigenous communities, and they do wonderful work. And Claire Ross, who's the editrice, the editor-in-chief at Pivot, which is the Solidarity Journalism Cooperative in Montreal. I'm in their offices presently streaming this. And the panel is going to be talking a little bit about the Quebec perspective, reactions to the French debate last night, and of course reactions to what we're going to see occur over the next couple hours. But before we check out really quick, for you guys, I'm really curious. Can you tell viewers a little bit about what you're working on that we might see in the next week or two being released? Luke?
Actually, maybe this might be a great opportunity for Eric Wickham to unveil a little project he's been working on over the last number of weeks.
Eric Wickham, what is it?
Oh, I'm always tinkering in the news labs. So I've been working on a little project I like to call the Candidate Story Map. It is a compilation. Well, first I should give you like the elevator pitch. I think a lot of people know about the party leaders or the leaders of major parties in federal and provincial elections in this country, but I think there is a lack of available information about the MP candidates throughout these ridings. Press Progress has been around for quite a while now. We've got over a decade of stories to be pulling from. So what I did was build a map out of an SVG from the government of Canada of just, the ridings in this country. And I started attaching the stories that were about candidates that are running in this year's election to it. So you can go there, head to candidatetracker.pressprogress.ca. You can check out and see if there are any stories about your candidates in your riding from Press Progress. I'm opening it up to people as well. If there's a story that you think that people should know about a candidate in your riding, there is a form on that site, and just check it out, fill it out, and I will get to reviewing it shortly.
I'm just shaking my head back and forth and up and down because I'm upset, I'm confused, because that's such a wonderful idea, and I'm very emotional. Eric, I love that. Luke? Yes?
The other thing about Eric's candidate tracker map that I think is really interesting is we have about 11 years worth of news stories that we've done, investigations that we've done into candidates. And that stuff is just all on our website. So this is actually a really interesting way, I think, to take some of that older content and then present it in a way that makes it relevant to what's happening in this current election.
I love that. Eric, thank you. I had no idea. What a surprise. What a delight. I love that. Luke, anything you want to tease really quick in 2 minutes before we begin to wrap and lean into this debate?
Well, you might be aware that this is actually nothing to do with the federal election at all, but you might recall that there was a very weird food and book expo that happened in Ottawa last year. I covered this event. I just found out that it's happening again at the Horticulture Building at Lansdowne Park. So rest assured, I'm on it. If anyone is familiar with that story, I am aware of what's going on, and I might have a story about that in the next.
From what I recall, it was just like a great book fair with a ton of books. Is that right?
So there were far right speakers. There were cults that had booths at this event. There was a kind of a pretty wild debate that took place that saw Maxime Bernier kind of get into an altercation with Nora Loretto. A number of event sponsors backed out, including the Mexican Embassy, a number of upstate New York PBS affiliates. Hold on. No, you're not cutting me off here. I got more.
But I have to do the wrap up. I'm gonna say to viewers, go check out that article because it was an eyebrow raiser and it was an exceptional piece of investigative reporting from Luc LeBrun. Luc LeBrun in Ottawa. What, Luc? I have to read the outro.
There was a cougar dating event. Okay, I just gotta throw that one in there.
They had live animals as well. Did they have a license for that? Okay, Luc LeBrun in Ottawa, Eric Wickham in Toronto. I'm gonna let you guys go. I gotta read the outro so people have time to get to the debate. I'll see you guys after the debate. Let's have fun, okay? Bye to Luc LeBrun in Ottawa and to Eric Wickham in Toronto. Really quick before viewers you check out, I just want to let you know that you're watching the Press Progress Federal Leaders Debate 2025 live stream show with your PressProgress.ca news team. Luc LeBrun in Ottawa, Stephen Magusiak in Calgary is coming up. That was Eric Wickham in Toronto, and you'll be hearing from Emma Arkell in Vancouver. Sign up for the Press Progress newsletter and support their work at PressProgress.ca, and subscribe to the Press Progress Sources podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and at Canada's progressive podcast community, HarbingerMediaNetwork.com, and you can find them and 26 other publishers at the Progressive Journalism Aggregation Community website, unrigged.ca. This stream's going to pause while we watch the debate, but we're going to be right back right after it's done, 9 p.m. Eastern, with Stephen Magusiak in Calgary, Emma Arkell in Vancouver, and with our guests, Ricardo Acuña in Edmonton, the Rovers' Savannah Stewart, and Pivot's Claire Ross in Montreal, and some surprises too. We're not covering the debate directly, so if you want to go catch some live streaming from some of our friends, independent Canadian journalism sensation Rachel Gilmore is live on her YouTube right now. Go check that out. And notorious Montreal influencer Rob Rousseau is going to be speaking with Toronto-based media critic Dr. Shama Rangwala and muckraking journalist Jeremy Appel in Edmonton on Rob Rousseau's Twitch. Go look for Rob Rousseau on Twitch. This is a great era for being able to catch progressive journalists, opinion havers, and seeing the debate through those perspectives. You can catch the debate live online at CPAC, at CBC, at CTV, and at Global News. We will see you back right here in a couple hours. And now go find where that debate's at. We'll see you back here. Here's the 2025 federal election leaders debate. Welcome back to the Press Progress Federal Leaders Debate 2025 live stream show Rough Justice Edition, where your PressProgress.ca news team is going to be coming to you live after the English federal leaders debate with in-depth commentary, analysis, and special guests, and featuring your friends from the Press Progress newsroom, Luke LeBrun in Ottawa, Stephen Magusiak in Calgary, Emma Arkell in Vancouver, maybe Eric Wickham in Toronto. I'm Unrigged Community Director and Harbinger Executive Director Andre Goulet in Montreal. Press Progress is an award-winning nonprofit news organization focused on uncovering the news through original investigative and explanatory journalism, serving readers a brand of journalism unafraid to ask critical questions, confront injustice, impact real-world change, and uphold responsible journalistic standards. We have an exciting post-debate lineup for you tonight. Stay tuned for Edmonton think tank, the Parkland Institute's Ricardo Acuña in conversation with Stephen Magusiak in Calgary. Then the Rovers, Savannah Stewart, and Pivot's Claire Ross in Montreal will sit down with Emma Arkell in Vancouver for some Quebec perspective on the French language debate from last night and this evening's just completed English 2025 federal leader debate. And finally, Luke LeBrun's going to be sitting down with Jonathan Goldsbie. But first, behind the scenes, everyone at Press Progress was on the edge of their seats, really wondering what was going to happen next. That was an incredible evening. Luke, Emma, we couldn't believe our eyes. What are some of your hottest takeaways? Emma, you saw the whole thing, right?
I did, yeah. Now I wish I had done the pre-show instead of the post-show. I think I was in a much better mood a couple hours ago.
What got you down? For me, it was Poilievre being like steel spikes shoved into my eyes. But yeah, for you, what was the initial takeaway, or what made you feel tired and defeated?
What made me feel tired and defeated? It felt like everyone was in a different debate. It felt like Singh was doing story time. Poilievre was doing the 3-word slogan machine. Carney was very calm, almost seemed a little tired as well. But yeah, I was also just very disappointed with Singh bringing up Mom Stop the Harm without naming the harm reduction policies that Mom Stop the Harm calls for, demands, actually.
What are those demands?
Those demands are safe supply. Those demands are safe consumption sites. Those demands are an expansion of harm reduction. And all of that is under attack in our country. And it just feels like a bit of a cop-out to bring up such a great advocacy organization, but not name those policies.
Really good observation. I do want to say, though, in Carney's defense, he was probably tired from counting his money all day because he's got too much to count. So over to Luke LeBrun. Luke, initial takeaways from that debate, and are you feeling as devastated as Emma?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned before on the pre-debate stream that I was expecting Mark Carney would be kind of the focal point of the debate, and that seemed to pan out for the most part. Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, the thing that, I hate to just sort of focus on the aesthetics of these debates, but I mean, this is kind of a spectacle for the most part, right? So what else?
It's a visual medium, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was and the reason why I bring this up is I did think it was interesting that, for example, Pierre Poilievre seemed very much, in my mind, it seemed like he was trying to speak to the camera in an effort to get clips that would later be circulate on social media. So it's important to keep in mind that even for those who actually watch these debates, I mean, these clips will take on a life of their own afterwards. Meanwhile, Mark Carney, it almost felt like he was on a panel discussion rather than in a debate. I noticed a bunch of points where he was actually, kind of reinforcing other leaders' points, and he just seemed very collegial in the way he was approaching it, which I found kind of strange because it's like, dude, this is a debate. You're competing against these people. But I do think that played well in the moment. But again, thinking about how these things have a life of their own after the debate, I kind of wonder how that approach will actually serve Mark Carney. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of my impression of it all. I mean, I think also Jagmeet Singh needed to insert his message into the debate as much as possible, especially because he's been struggling through the election to, I mean, just as everyone's been struggling just to kind of cut through all the noise, given everything going on in the US and going on with Trump and so on and so forth. So yeah, those were kind of my very, superficial aesthetic impressions of the debate.
That's okay. It's a visual medium. You're allowed to be a little superficial. It's a little different than the journalism that you guys usually do. Stephen Magusiak in Calgary, we were just saying that it was difficult to sit through the whole debate, kind of a challenge. Do you feel kind of shook after that 2 hours, or did it energize you?
I wouldn't say either. I wasn't shook or energized. I just noticed Pierre Poilievre interrupting quite a bit throughout it, and it was actually kind of light on policy, and there were a few significant points that were missed. So yeah, we'll get into that later.
What did you notice being missed? I know you're going to get into it with your guest later too, but just for kind of hot takes, what were you wanting to hear that didn't come out?
Okay, like Alberta separatism and Indigenous issues were not addressed at all, even once.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. Emma, what did you notice absent from that debate?
Yeah, I think Stephen makes a great point. The fact that Indigenous issues and Indigenous people are only brought up in the context of resource extraction is extremely problematic. Yeah, a really, really awful oversight. What else was missing? I think that's the biggest one. That is really what stands out the most to me.
Yeah, representation. I mean, it's the same way that the way they talk about housing isn't from a renter's perspective or the perspective of people who have no homes. And so maybe the urgency is kind of missing. So yeah,
on that note, actually, yeah. Andre, I also noticed, for example, there was a whole section on public safety and security. And if you think about so they were talking about crime and things like that during this section of the debate. But if you think about the way that is framed, right? It's sort of framing it in the sense of, dealing with these threats, right? And, I mean, they're kind of framing all these issues in that sort of public safety, kind of discourse or whatever. And, meanwhile, like in some of these cases, these are, you can also talk about these issues from a healthcare perspective or from, in terms of it being a socioeconomic issue. So, I mean, I guess I say this just to point out that the way the debate is framed can sometimes, lead the questioning down a certain path.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to just, for a real quick moment, mention that the coolness of Carney, I think, is definitely to his benefit because he needs to appear really above it all. And I was really watching for if Poilievre was going to land the jab or whatever that did the trick to knock down Carney. I didn't see that. I was happy to see Jagmeet really energetic, and I agree, Emma, he didn't touch on everything he should have or could have, but largely I thought he brought a lot of energy, which was good to see. And of course, Yves-François Blanchet is just he's aging and he's probably getting grumpier, and you definitely get a bit of a vibe from him. And so I thought it was really interesting. I wanted to find out, since this is our first time on this stream, we really covered the East and talked about issues in Ontario, and we're going to talk about Quebec a little later in Emma's interview with Savannah Stewart from the Rover and Clara Ross from Pivot. But while we have you guys on, and before we get to Stephen and his guest, what's the vibe out west? How has the election been hitting people? So Emma, in British Columbia, the province often kind of seems like all out on its own, like the mountains block off any real connection with the rest of the country. So for you on the ground in Vancouver, what's it like? What's that election been like way over there?
Well, I'm in Vancouver, and so I get a certain perspective here. The sort of vibe that I get here is that people are rallying around Carney, but that is by no means the case in interior or eastern BC. the NDP, as you said, is really struggling in this election, and it's becoming about the Liberals and the Conservatives. And so I know Poilievre is putting a lot of effort into turning some of those NDP ridings in the interior into Conservative ones. He recently visited the Okanagan and called it the best part of Alberta. And we also had a provincial election just 6 months ago that saw the BC Liberals, which was a center-right to right-wing party, despite the name, they totally imploded, completely imploded, and the BC Conservatives really surged in and took a lot of their voters. And now the federal Conservatives are running Aaron Gunn, a very controversial former BC Conservative candidate and a notorious figure on the far right in North Island Powell River. And there have been protests over his candidacy, most prominently by First Nations leaders who are critiquing his residential school denialism. But as far as I know, he is still a candidate. So it's not a province that's easy to just. There's no one story, right?
Mm.
Like there's definite difference within the province.
Okay, thank you. What about in Alberta, Stephen? Also very much its own space, culturally very unique, almost its own country. So what did you think? You mentioned Alberta separatism missing from the debate, but what that's one of the vibes going on in Alberta right now. That and what else?
Well, I mean, the Alberta separatism bit is like, we're talking about like maybe at most 30% of the population that would actually do it. So
30%, yeah.
It's not insignificant. Like, it's there. It's very much there. But also, I'm like, with the actual patriotism angle, I think that we might be seeing some ridings flip liberal. Overall, though, Alberta is like it's a very aggrieved province that's angry all the time.
Mm-hmm. I understand it's angry because
I'm gonna annoy the hell out of my guest in a minute by grilling him on this. But
well, we're looking forward to getting to that. But one second, just before we get to your interview with Ricardo, Stephen, you had an interesting seatmate flying back from Ottawa last week. Who sat down, and were you sitting first, or did she sit down first and you joined her? And who was your seatmate?
She sat down. I joined her. Her name is Danielle Smith.
Danny Smith, Premier of Alberta. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to my seat, and I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" I got the window seat. And,
that's good.
Just to point out, I'm fascinated that she flew in the middle seat.
Also that she flew coach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to her credit, she's not like a business class person. So, yeah.
And just for viewers, there was no conversation. You did not chat with her.
No, none. I consider talking to people on planes a form of violence, so I did not engage. Also, they were giving Romy and I kind of like dirty looks. So,
Press Progress publisher Romy Garrido, notoriously hostile in public and easy for people to be angry at. Stephen, thank you. Luke and Emma, we're going to check you guys out, and we're going to bring in Stephen's guests. So thank you. Luke, talk to you soon. Emma, talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
And Stephen, your guest this evening, tell us a little bit about Ricardo.
Ricardo is the executive director of the Parkland Institute, a public policy think tank, and he is also on the board of Canadians for Tax Fairness. So I'm probably going to annoy the hell out of him.
No.
3 minutes.
Ricardo, it's so good to see you. Thanks a lot for joining us. I'm going to leave you to Stephen and have a great conversation.
All right.
Thanks, Andre.
Thank you, Ricardo. So let's get right into it. Who won the debate?
Oh, jeez. I'm
sorry.
I knew that was going to be the first question, and I just totally failed to prep for it. Honestly, I don't think there was a clear winner. And I heard some of the conversation before I came on here. And I think, for sure, Carney really came across as this kind of very serious and thoughtful dad kind of figure on the stage. I think that worked for him. I think at the same time, there's a couple of times when Poilievre just turned to the camera and spoke directly to voters, the one on affordability in particular. I think that moment really worked for him. I think in that sense, a toss-up between the two of them. I think in terms of a clear winner, there wasn't one. The losers for sure was anybody who came into this debate looking for something that might distinguish Carney from Poilievre in terms of policies and positions and platform, because I didn't really see anything there to differentiate them in any significant way.
Well, you've described them as being only millimeters apart in terms of policy on any front, if I recall correctly. I was hoping to get more into the Alberta separatism stuff, but please expand. Like, where do you see their failings?
Well, I mean, I think on the policy stuff, they're both of them. They're both offering the same solutions. This idea of tax cuts, and tax cuts are going to save us. And when you break down the impact of those tax cuts, the bulk of the benefits are going to go to the wealthy, who really aren't going to reinvest that money in the economy. So, in that sense, the tax cuts don't make any sense. But they both got the same policy on that. On housing, they're both leaning heavily on private developers to actually put their housing proposals into place. So again, more money into the same industry that got us into this mess on housing affordability. Really no distinction there. They're both wanting to build pipelines. They're both wanting to grow fossil fuel production. One of the best lines of the night was after Carney and Poilievre arguing about who would do better for the fossil fuel industry, when Blanchet stepped in and said, yeah, all of the stuff you guys are talking about is fairy tale stuff, right? Like, I think that was the line of the night. It really highlighted how lost they are and how they're really both singing from the same songbook. So nothing there to distinguish them. Really happy to get into the separatism stuff. It's always fascinating stuff for me.
We will. I promise you we will. But so first, like on the housing front, the cons are saying they will axe the sales tax on new homes. They're going to train new home builders. How would this actually solve the affordability issue? I'm asking this as someone who is wondering how the average person is just going to be able to afford a new home. Like not all of us can just buy a single detached home in the suburbs. Some of us just need a house.
Yeah, this notion, and now all of them are kind of presenting this axing the sales tax on new homes as a solution. If you're looking at anywhere in Canada, a new house that's going to run you, an average house that's going to run you between 500,000 and 1.5 million for the average house, a difference of 5% on that is not all of a sudden going to make it affordable for the majority of young Canadians who are looking to get into the market. It's not going to do it, right? In that sense, Poilievre's rhetorical nuance, Carney's rhetorical nuance is a little better because he acknowledges that you've got to deal with the way you're building houses, the types of houses you're building, and all of those things. But there's really nothing in his policy that specifies how he'll make those cheaper houses be built.
So, do you want to talk about separatism?
Yeah, bring it on.
All right, let's do this. Okay, so we're talking about Alberta separatism or independence or whatever you want to call it. Avoiding any actual predictions of how history is going to unfold on that front. It's a thing. It's a thing that commands not exactly a majority of the voting public. Like, we're talking about 30% maybe numbers.
Yep.
It's pretty dubious even picking it at 30%, but the movement isn't new. It predates Trump. Why are we so angry here? How would you describe it to the rest of Canada?
There's a culture of exceptionalism in the province, and a big part of that is just the natural resource wealth, and the way this kind of frontier mentality that developed Alberta in the first place. But politicians over the years have really fomented that. They've really stoked that fire. Think about Lougheed going to war with Trudeau around the national energy policy and defending Albertans' rights to sell our oil to whoever we wanted for however much we wanted. And then Klein's famous quote of Eastern creeps and bums, and his using that as a way to rally Albertans behind him. His using of the notwithstanding clause in terms of human rights for the LGBTQ community. Jason Kenney on equalization and, you know, the failure to get pipelines built, and now Danielle Smith on virtually all of it, like all of the above. It's a consistent way for conservative Alberta leaders to build their own popularity in times where they feel that they might be starting to slip, or where the economy is starting to slip, or where there's something else going on. What I hope they realized in this election is that this may play well in Alberta, but it doesn't play well in the rest of Canada, right? I mean, Preston Manning standing up and essentially threatening Canadians, don't vote Liberal or Alberta may separate or you'll have a unity crisis on your hands, is again, the kind of stuff that plays really well in Alberta, but really just, it didn't do Poilievre any favors. And it kind of made Alberta look like that, you know, laughing stock that's just so worried about itself that it can't see beyond the end of its nose.
Sure, but like, do you think the unity crisis is a actual thing? Because we're looking at a referendum at the end of the month, or at the end of next month, I guess. Should Carney win? It's like, to what extent do you think this is actually a threat to national unity, as Danielle Smith threatened?
I don't think it's a threat to national unity in any significant way. I think what's more likely strategically for Danielle Smith and the UCP is that they will use this whole referendum piece as a way to bring back the Alberta pension plan debate and try to say, yeah, okay, we're not really interested in separation, but give us a better deal when we separate and pull away our pension plan, right? When we pull our pension plan out of the CPP. I don't think it's, 30%, I think, is at best, right? I don't think that's consistent across the province. I don't think any kind of national debate coming out of this election is going to turn the other necessary 20% plus one of Albertans into separatists all of a sudden. And honestly, I think if anybody's really thinking of separating because the Liberals won't want to build a pipeline, good luck building one when you're a separate country, landlocked in between, surrounded by two other countries. It's just not logical.
Yeah, I want to bring it back to pipelines because recently, you were wondering earlier, I think, if anyone would be interested in putting forward anything solidified in terms of putting something viable in terms of environmental policy and pipelines. Who do you think is like the winner in this debate?
I mean, I think, and oddly, I think Jagmeet Singh's non-answer on pipelines was probably the most realistic of them, right? The absurdity of believing that a pipeline, which will take probably a decade and billions of dollars worth of public subsidies, if not public ownership, seeing that as a solution for a short-term trade war is just absurd, right? Poilievre and Carney just don't seem to understand that pipelines don't equal diversification. Like, they both talk about needing to diversify our economy, and building another pipeline and making us more dependent on oil is not diversification in any way whatsoever. It's going to maybe diversify our markets, but it'll make us more dependent on oil and gas than ever at a time of climate crisis, when the rest of the world outside of North America is actually starting to find ways to turn away from the product that we want to start selling them in 10 years.
So explain it to me like I'm 12. So we have a pipeline to the south that was canceled, and now the debate is, does it go east or does it go west?
Well, so we've got one going west. It seems to be doing well by all accounts. We're shipping more oil to China than we ever have before, which was its intent. It didn't need to cost us as much as it did. And you could make an argument that it's actually having a positive impact in the middle of this trade war. To go east is where they want to go next, right? Poilievre kind of wavers back and forth between saying we need to go east so we can get Alberta oil directly to Ontario and Quebec, but he's also wavers and says we need to go east so we can get our fuels to Europe and other markets, right? The reality is that neither one of those is likely to happen. In the French debate last night, both he and Carney were directly asked what would happen if Quebec and Indigenous communities got in the way of building their pipeline, and both of them didn't have an answer to it or refused to answer it, right? It's not going to happen, and if it does happen, it'll be just like the Trans Mountain, which took tens of billions of dollars of public subsidy and a decade to complete. And by that time, who's going to want the product? And Trump will be long gone. So it really makes no sense at all.
So I guess going back to the debate, is there anything else that you think got glossed over?
I think the healthcare stuff, I think the debate committee really did a disservice because neither debate actually featured healthcare as a key discussion point. The moderator today threw Jagmeet Singh a bone and said, you want to talk about healthcare so badly? Here, you've got 2 minutes to talk about healthcare. But, you know, if you list the crisis points that Canadians are feeling as a whole, and you remove from them the kind of top couple of them around affordability and the tariff war, healthcare is up there, right? People are struggling everywhere across this country to find family doctors with waiting lists for surgeries, to get into hospitals, waiting lists in ERs. And nobody's offering any concrete or substantial solutions for fixing that, right? Carney and Poilievre are both vowing to cut like billions of dollars in tax revenues and eliminate funding, and then saying, oh yeah, we're going to fix healthcare too, but without actually saying how they're going to do it without any money. So I think that was a huge disservice in the debates. Great for Jagmeet that he got to speak to be really passionate about it, but I think without it being treated like a serious subject, it's not getting the attention it deserves.
Ricardo, thanks for mentioning that because, yeah, like that's a good thing to flag. Healthcare was mentioned, but it wasn't dove into, and we didn't see a lot of real conversation about it at all. And it's one of the things that affects the most Canadians, like consistently. Ricardo, it's been great to have you on the stream. Stephen, I think we got to wrap it there. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you both for having me. This has been fun.
Okay, have a good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Ricardo Acuña is with the Parkland Institute in Edmonton, Alberta. Stephen Magusiak is Press Progress's Alberta reporter in Calgary. Stephen will be back later. But now we are bringing into the studio, we wanted to touch on Quebec issues, and Emma Arkell is in Vancouver. But Emma, we wanted to pair you with a couple of great Quebecois journalists. Claire Ross is with Pivot, which is Quebec's Solidarity Journalism Cooperative. She's the editrice and fluently Francophone and fluently English, but lives in French, I think, more. And then Savannah Stewart, also fluently French, born and raised in Quebec, but I think lives more in English than in French. But I thought it'd be a really interesting conversation. What are you guys going to get into?
Well, we're really going to get into the French language debate. I watched it last night. You know, some of the same points came up, but there were also aspects of immigration policy that are specific to Quebec that did not come up at all really in the English language debate. But I think they're still really worthwhile topics, and we'll discuss them.
Absolutely. I'm bringing on Claire Ross and Savannah Stewart. And of course, it's definitely going to come up that we all have a bit of a crush on Yves-François Blanchet, but I'll leave you guys to discuss that more. Claire, welcome. Savannah, welcome. And Emma, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Andre. Welcome, Claire and Savannah. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know it's late where you are. It's still nice and sunny here in Vancouver. I'm curious. I know, sorry. It's springtime already here.
Canada strikes again.
I want to start off just sort of like assessing the election vibe in Quebec. How are people feeling about the election, especially in light of Trump's attacks on Canadian sovereignty? Savannah, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I think it's been interesting to see this election. There's been a bit of a surprising rally around the Canadian flag because of the context south of the border, which is not something that we would normally see if, to this extent, I would mean, if what was going on with Trump wasn't the case. I think that Quebecers are reacting to Americans having shown a lack of respect for the French language in terms of trying to renegotiate product, like products needing to have both language in order to be sold in Quebec. There's been some trying to negotiate around that. So I feel like Quebecers are kind of feeling like for this election, it's better to go with the devil we know, being Canada, and go all in. That's kind of the way it's feeling to me right now.
Right. Very interesting. Claire, how are you feeling? What is the vibe where you are?
Well, first, thank you for having us. How is the vibe? Well, it's hard to say because there's this idea that Quebec is like something coherent, which it is not. So I cannot speak for all Quebecers, but what I saw is, as Savannah said, something like maybe a bit of Canadian nationalism emerging, something that does not exist or does not really exist usually here in Quebec. So we've seen that Le Bloc Québécois is losing ground. They are maybe expected to have like 20 seats instead of 30 they had last time. So they are going down. If you look at the graphs for the vote projection, they go down with the Conservative, which maybe says something about where they stand. But also you see that they are losing votes to the Liberal because people want to know what the devil they know, like Savannah said. But what I think is funny also is the way the Bloc reacts to that, which is you've seen Yves-François Blanchet in the French debate trying to say, yeah, well, the situation about tariffs and US is maybe not as bad as it seems, which I kind of agree with. We'll talk about it later, but he's angry about what he calls nation building around this crisis. But nation building is bread and butter. So, but just another nation building. So there's this conflict of nationalism, I think, in Quebec going on right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Let's get more into tariffs and the bloc, because honestly, having always lived in English-speaking parts of Canada, I'm not very familiar with the bloc. But so far, they are the only party that has released a platform, is my understanding. And so can you help us understand what their approach to tariffs is and how it differs from the other parties, which the other parties mostly seem to be talking about tax cuts?
Claire, do you want to start, Claire?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, the Bloc Québécois is the only party that didn't promise any tax cuts, but they promised a bit of tax deduction, but it is different. It is smaller than what the other parties did. I think the main difference between the Bloc and other parties' reaction to tariffs is mainly the fact that the industries here in Quebec are not exactly the same as we have elsewhere in Canada. So it's not about like a political vision, but about material interests that differ between Quebec and, let's say, Ontario. So during the French debate, again, Yves-François Blanchet was all about, you piss your pants when the automobile industry is attacked, but you literally said that. But when it's aluminum or wood or something like that, you don't care. And he's angry about the fact that there is more for steel and cars than for aluminum. So that's pretty much what I noted. And evidently there is this idea that Trump criticized the fact that there is some language rules for what you import in Canada, and Yves-François Blanchet doesn't want to let go on that. That's the Bloc Québécois brand of reaction to the tariff.
Savannah, do you have anything to add aside from a cat?
Yeah, she loves to hang out where I'm hanging out. That was a pretty good response from Claire, and maybe I'll just add that it's not like Yves-François Blanchet needs to have a lot of policy on tariffs because he's not running for prime minister, right? And so maybe the most interesting thing that came out from him was a call for a Buy Canadian Buy Canadian Act, which was interesting coming from the leader of the Bloc Québécois. But yeah, he can get away with not doing a whole lot.
It mentions in small character that this Buy Canadian has to be in part Buy Québécois. So
yeah.
You got to read the fine print.
Yeah. Well,
sorry, Dave.
It was mentioned in Ricardo and Stephen's conversation a little bit that healthcare was brought up in a very strange way, especially in the English language debate, but also in the French language one, mostly by Jagmeet Singh trying to push the issue, sometimes a little awkwardly. I definitely think it's on a lot of people's minds, though. Like, if you were to ask Canadians what they are concerned about, I think healthcare would definitely be one of the top issues. And it's also like fundamental to our national identity, especially if we're talking about how we're different from the States, right?
That's what Singh said. Exactly. He said that word for word in the French debate. We're talking about identity. I want to be able to talk about healthcare because that's Canadian identity. And he was angry at the MC who was not letting him talk enough about healthcare and whatnot.
Yeah. In the French language debate, Blanchet accused Singh of impinging on provincial jurisdiction with his promises to healthcare, and I think he did as well in the English one. Do you think his concern about provincial jurisdiction is representative of Quebecers when it comes to healthcare? Savannah, your thoughts?
I don't think that the average Quebecer necessarily cares about, doesn't think about jurisdiction, like what is federal and what is provincial, as much as the politicians do. But I do think that Quebecers know that our healthcare system is failing. I know that they know that. And I know that they also do want to see Quebec retain as many powers as it can within the province, and do generally react well to a leader of the Bloc Québécois, a provincial leader who stands up to federal infringement in jurisdiction. So they want good healthcare, and I think that Quebecers want good healthcare, also want our autonomy and respect of that autonomy. So it'll be tricky to kind of juggle both of those things for Singh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems like a difficult thing to balance.
Well, I think there's you have this conflict that is presented to us between Quebec and Canada, or federal government and provincial government. But it's an easy way not to talk about the conflict between the left and the right, Every country, every province is divided between a more progressive and a more progressive team, let's say. And what we have right now in Quebec is a very right-wing government, and we had one for more than 20 years now. So there's, as a left-wing progressive Quebecer who has never known something else in my life, in my voter's life, maybe, I feel like, I don't want Quebec to be erased from the map of political power, but I also want healthcare, and I also want med insurance and everything. So I feel like, if it comes from the NDP and the federal government and the Liberals, I'll take it, And I think I'm not the only one. I think many progressive people who are not that nationalist will feel the same. And I remember talking with a friend recently who told me, the federal government in Quebec, it's a little bit our only kind of check and balance we have. So if the provincial government doesn't want to do anything or just wants to, infringe on freedoms and rights, well, let's count on the federal government to protect us.
Right. Yeah. They sort of keep each other in check in maybe a more ideal way.
Yeah,
they
kind
could,
of.
at least. Yeah. One other thing that really struck me about the Bloc and Blanchet was that he appeared to differ quite a bit from the other leaders with regards to energy policy and the environment. He was the only one to say that he doesn't want more investment in oil. He pushed back on Poilievre, saying that Quebecers want a new pipeline running through Quebec, and he rejected the idea of investment in nuclear energy. And so my sense, and this is probably wrong, but my sense from a distance was always that the Bloc was like center, maybe even center right. But these sound like very progressive environmental policies, at least within the context of this debate, without like having an actual Green Party there or being a little more ambitious maybe. So I'm curious what the Bloc's track record is when it comes to environmental policy and resource development. Claire?
Well, I think it's less about the Bloc's track record and more about Quebec's track record. Yves-François Blanchet was environment minister for a brief moment when the Parti Québécois was in power around 2012 and yeah. So he was the one closing the nuclear power plant in Gentilly, and also he did a few things, but the main idea is that Quebec produces electricity. That's it. Once again, it's not a progressive agenda from Yves-François Blanchet. It's a Québécois agenda. It's a nationalist agenda. And we have this thing in Quebec that some called hydro-nationalism, which is just the idea that we have this sense of an identity revolving around like dams on indigenous land, basically. So it's more about going to touch on this feeling in the heart of Quebecers, but also about François Legault, our prime minister, his green plan is all about electricity because that's where money is going to come from for Quebec. So there is this quote from Yves-François Blanchet where he said, "Quebec is the best place in the world to develop a green, clean energy superpower, to become a superpower." And he also said there is not a single dime to be made on oil in Quebec. So it's basically that.
Right. So it's more about positionality than it is about ideology.
Yeah. And if you look at the environmental program from the Bloc, it's all anti-fossil fuel because it looks good, but there's nothing about nature or biodiversity or anything.
Right. Indigenous sovereignty.
What?
I would, obviously, every time I speak is when my cat jumps up on my desk. But I would just say to that, I think everyone knows to some extent that, the qualifiers of like what's of the left and what's of the right that work relatively neatly in English Canada just don't work as neatly here in Quebec. And the environment isn't necessarily a left-wing issue. I think maybe because we have such a reusable energy, hydroelectricity. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say like Claire said that it's a progressive agenda. More, it's just a Quebec agenda. It's not exactly. It's not anything crazy to say that Quebecers don't want a pipeline passing through Quebec when it's not going to, oil is not our economy. It won't. Quebecers don't see a benefit for them in that. They see it benefiting another economy to the west. So right. It's like the pipeline issue is relatively settled here. I thought it was more settled than it was in the past month or so with the election campaign. All of a sudden it does feel like there is openness to it, but historically, it's always been very much a closed issue. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see where that goes.
I'm just stepping in, Emma, to also flag for viewers that Savannah Stewart's work as the managing editor at the Rover and Claire's work as the editrice at Pivot really helps guide to super exceptional resources for independent news in Quebec, which Press Progress viewers will certainly get a lot out of. And like, just for instance, on the Rover front page right now, they had extensive coverage of the French debate last night. There's an article on the battle for Mount Royal where Anthony Housefather is trying to keep his seat. There's an opinion piece on Radio-Canada silencing the Green Party leader, and a lot more. And then at Pivot, the headline in today's most recent piece is that there's the Zionist lobbies in the inbox of the housing minister, Derry, and lots of other great content. So definitely urge viewers to check out the Rover.ca and Pivot.Quebec. This has been a really interesting conversation, hopefully giving people a little bit of context for like how things appear from over here in Montreal, where I'm at too. And I don't know, Emma, any other questions before we wrap this segment?
I did really want to ask about one thing that came up in the Quebec debate that did not come up at all in the English language one, which is Haitian refugees coming into Quebec and the Safe Third Country Act. I think, Claire, you have recently published work at Pivot about the Safe Third Country Act. Could you just talk a little bit about that and whether it makes sense given that we're in a second Trump administration?
2 minutes, Claire.
Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, the Asian refugee thing is about the fact that most, like 500,000 of them could lose their status in the U.S. and they would maybe come to Quebec where there is a big number of Asian already. And the thing with the Safe Third Country Act is that it prevents people from coming from the U.S. to become refugees in Canada. So they could not come, even though they would have their place among us. But it's been told by many NGOs for years that no, the US is not a safe place. So even though you're there, you should be able to ask for the refugee status in Canada. And now it's even worse since Trump is like acting crazy and just sending people back to be jailed abroad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Savannah, anything to add to that?
Nope. No, that's it.
Claire, thank you for that. Thanks for sort of like clarifying that and articulating that. Savannah Stewart is in Point St. Charles. You can find her work at the Rover.ca, where, like with Pivot, they have an incredible team of journalists just doing extremely excellent investigative journalism that's just like of such a top shelf quality that people should definitely check it out. That's the Rover.ca. Claire Ross is in Villeray, and you can find her work at Pivot.Quebec. And Arkell's in Vancouver. I don't know what your neighborhood is. I don't even know. Does Vancouver have neighborhoods? It's just like one.
Of course, it is neighborhood.
Does it? Okay.
I'm not saying what neighborhood I'm in.
No, of course not. Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you very much, Savannah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And moving on now to our final segment of the evening, Luc LeBrun coming back online. Luc, we have an exciting guest that you're going to be speaking with. Who is Jonathan Goldsbie? You're on mute, if you don't mind unmuting.
Okay. Jonathan Goldsbie is he's joining us following his Massey Fellowship, where he has been reflecting on journalism and the ethics of journalism, which will be very important for our conversation about the pandemonium that has broken out behind the scenes at the leaders debate, where Ezra Levant from Rebel Media got into a pretty wild altercation with a number of journalists behind the scenes in the journalists in the media room, and so we'll talk to Jonathan about that momentarily.
I love that. And just really quickly to give him an intro, I'll bring him on screen. Jonathan Goldsbie is an incoming staffer at Press Progress and a former editor at Canadaland, where he's been on leave on a fellowship since September at Massey. Jonathan, we're really excited to get to speak with you tonight. Welcome to the Press Progress live stream.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to check out. Thanks, you guys, and I'll come back in a little bit.
I hope this isn't too pretentious a background. It's the
I
rare
was
book
wondering, where
library
are
of
you?
tea.
Are you in Fort
I'm not
Knox
actually.
right now?
As the little fuzz around the edges can indicate, I'm not currently at the Rare Book Library at U of T, nor would they let me loudly record something in the Rare Book Library of U of T. But it's a very nice space. Not enough people know about it, and it was like an infinite library of the universe in the second last episode of Star Trek Discovery. So I thought I would showcase it.
Well, I also appreciate you dressing up for this conversation. So we were going to originally talk about some of the chaos that happened yesterday at the French language debate, where, as you pointed out, actually maybe we could start off with you just noting some of the work that you did to break down how many questions went to which outlets. But it was really ironic because, Rebel Media consistently tries to portray itself as a victim. They say that, they are being denied the opportunity to ask questions. But as you found out, Rebel Media actually got quite a few number of questions.
Yeah, I mean, Rebel and the debate, for as long as the Debates Commission has been around, Rebel's had an interesting relationship with it, where they've attempted to filter out the Rebel or moderate it in different respects, and instead basically the Rebel has successfully used lawyers, gone to court on a couple of occasions to assert its right to be there at this scale and with the proportion of presence that it believes it has the right to assert. So basically, all of which is to say, they asked more questions than anyone else, than any other outlet last night after the French language leaders debate. There were 17 different people from whom questions were asked across all the different four different leaders. Each person got to ask a couple questions, or one question and one follow-up. But in practice, sometimes the second question is a distinct question. So of those 17, 4 people were from the Rebel. Another one was a Rebel alumnus. Another one was from True North, which is sort of a Rebel adjacent-ish outlet. And so they definitely seem to have a very strong presence. Also, they were all in person. As opposed to in 2021, they were actually also the best represented outlet after the asking questions after the debates. It was a smaller proportion overall, but because it was one question per person, because half the questions during COVID came in from the phone lines, I don't think it really stood out quite as prominently as it did last night. Especially given what we've since learned were certain limits or restrictions placed on many outlets, or at least it was told, generally the idea had been that you'd get one person per media organization, and how they define media organization was a little fuzzy, but a lot of organizations only sent one person, maybe one person from Global News, one person from the Globe, like into these media availabilities. But I mean, like Radio Canada had 3. So all of which is to say, the Rebel, via the extended correspondence with lawyers that they posted yesterday, was able to get 4 people asking questions, 5 people accredited, plus various sort of videographers, photographers, etc.
And they got about 25% of the, like 1/4 of all questions went to Rebel specifically. And then if you add on the other right-wing outlets, that would have brought them up to what, like 1/3 of the questions roughly, or something like that?
Roughly that. And I think it really felt like more like CBC was using the headline that all right, dominate the questions. And I'm not sure dominate is the right, like dominate suggests a majority, but I do think it was much more noticeable than it has been in the past, simply because there were 2 questions per person as opposed to just 1 question per person. There was fewer outlets overall getting to have any presence whatsoever. And it was, I would describe once again, disproportionate, outsized, and way in a way that people hadn't really registered or clicked or noticed in the last couple times.
So I also appreciate that you mentioned that the reason that we've heard, I mean, I've seen a lot of people question, how did Rebel even get in the first place? You mentioned that the reason that they are there is due to some court orders. They got injunctions back in 2019 and then 2021. I was actually I thought it'd be interesting to talk about that, but due to events tonight, I think it might be worthwhile shifting our focus more to that. So so maybe I'll hand it over to you here. Do you want to, I mean, we've both been sort of processing this information in real time. There's a number of videos that are circulating, which I'm sure you can find on at least my Blue Sky account, maybe yours. But Jonathan, would you care to try to break down what we have been witnessing over the last hour or so?
Well, over the past several hours since before the debate began, the rebel, Ezra Levant doesn't like when people say things that he believes are untrue. And so, although I've not yet found the clip of it, David Cockrum, CBC, said that basically Ezra tried to interrupt a live broadcast that they were doing. This is inside the security perimeter. Their CBC is broadcasting from outside. He tried to enter the frame, interrupt him, talk about what he believed was wrong live on air. And then within the press room itself, which clearly I am not in, there were a number of, I think you could fairly call them altercations with other journalists, but more just like shouting matches, which are not even like, they're not the worst shouting matches I've seen. Certainly not even the worst I've seen Ezra engage in. But I would more characterize them from the videos I've seen as loud, forceful, and or heated arguments. And somehow as a consequence seemingly as a consequence of this, or as a consequence of some component of this, which is we've yet to put our finger on, the Debates Commission has basically said there were security issues that meant that they would not be able to, or they did not feel comfortable proceeding with these post-debate press availabilities, which are always, to be honest, have been the past few rounds my favorite parts of the debates. Watching who gets to ask questions, what are the questions they ask, and how do the leaders respond. And I actually find those, especially given given the limited regular availability of some leaders to open questions, given also the diversity of outlets that do get to ask questions. I mean, it's not unusual to have alternative outlets. The last time I think the Wire report got in a bunch of questions. I don't even know what that is. It's not a far right thing. It's like a telecom mobility thing. Narcity got questions. I kind of like, I like that. I like watching that. And I like seeing how their leaders respond and bat the answers around. I like seeing Yves-François. I like seeing Blanchet in 2019 just shut down Kian Bexty, who at the time was with the Rebel, just saying, no, I don't answer the Rebel. And it was fun back when it was that easy before they engaged the sort of flood the zone approach, where simply by having more people participate or more people go, and more people attend, they are able to punch above their weight would probably be the most generous way to articulate that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I'm just looking at some of these videos here right now. So there's Ricochet Media's, I guess, founder and editor of Ricochet, Ethan Cox. So he says, "What I don't like, Ezra, is you preventing us from being able to ask questions on behalf of the public. You create a circus here." There's another video with Stewart Benson from the Hill Times, and it's kind of a lengthier exchange. But there is one point where Stewart says something to the effect of, like there's no rules here anymore. I mean, you got your presence here and the stuff that you've been doing over the last day or so. It's like who cares about the rules? Like, you're not following the rules, so why should I care about the rules? It's like that kind of a thing. Pretty clear. I mean, and then also, as you mentioned, David Cochran said that Ezra was trying to disrupt a live CBC broadcast or whatever was happening there. It does seem like there's a lot of frustration that has been boiling over. It seems pretty clear that a lot of, I think to go to Stewart's point, it does feel like there is frustration that the rules don't apply to Rebel, but they apply to everybody else. What do you make of this? Of what we saw tonight?
I'm not sure it's that the rules don't apply to the Rebels so much as any time that the Debates Commission, or frankly any type of governmental body or government adjacent body, has attempted to place rules or restrictions on them, they have challenged it in court. They've asked for often judicial review from the federal court, sometimes stuff in Alberta when that's been when something's happened there. And so like even when someone like a minister has blocked them on Twitter, they would often ask for judicial review of that. And so with the Debates Commission, this time they actually proactively got in touch with them. So what happened? So what happened in 2019 was they applied. The Debates Commission said no. You're an advocacy organization. Give like a 1-page response. They took that to court, got an injunction. An injunction is almost less a weighing of the merits, so much as it is just like on a balance of convenience. Would it cause more irreparable harm if this thing happened or if this thing didn't happen? They said, basically the judge said, like, just let them in. And then in 2021, the commission had crafted a longer list of criteria for how you'd qualify as a media outlet. The Rebel did not qualify under those criteria. They once again sought an injunction and were granted an injunction, with the judge saying that basically blasting the Debates Commission for supposedly farming out the criteria to like CAJ ethics guidelines. That's the Canadian Association of Journalists. And then, so this time, they per the correspondence the Rebel posted, they proactively reached out to the Debates Commission upon applying for accreditation, or maybe just before applying, saying like, hey, we're going to do this again. Are you going to block us one more time? And the Debates Commission said, no, you can have it, but there's this rule of one person per organization, and so that's when they started bustling, trying to assert that each of their separate verticals, Rebel Quebec, Rebel Prairies, Rebel BC, or West Coast, or whatever, counts as a separate media organization, the same way that CBC Toronto or CBC Montreal would count as separate media organizations.
They used actually the example of Post Media having, the National Post, the Ottawa Citizen, the Montreal Gazette, for example, which I actually thought was kind of, I thought they sort of had a point there, in the sense of if you're using that definition, why does a big conglomerate like, for example, Post Media, according to those rules, why would they be able to assign, a dozen reporters and someone else who doesn't have that structure wouldn't? To me, my kind of takeaway from that, I don't think that was the intent. And in fact, Post Media didn't even ask any questions.
No, I don't think so
at all. But, I think it kind of speaks to a flaw in the way that these institutions approach Rebel, and how they seem to really be struggling to figure out how to deal with them. It does sort of feel like they are creating these ad hoc rules, and they're kind of playing whack-a-mole, just trying to figure out ways to exclude them sometimes. And I guess I just wonder if these institutions are approaching it the right way. Like, do they have the right analysis of like what Rebel and other outlets like them are, like what the actual threat is that they are, that they pose? What do you think about the way, institutions like the Debates Commission, but also, I guess, press galleries and so on and so forth, how they've been approaching not just Rebel, but also these sort of right-wing alternative media outlets?
I think it's something that we've seen in Canada. We almost see in Canada more broadly, that anytime any kind of institution, any kind of governmental entity encounters something that's just like slightly out of the ordinary, somewhat different from what they're used to encountering, just something a bit different, they just don't know how to respond to it or what to do. It really throws them for a loop. And in the case of the Rebel, and actually they were joined in their first court application in 2019 by True North, as soon as they start litigating things, they have decent lawyers, and they're able to project enough. They're able to articulate what in a court sound like, and I guess sound like decent arguments, and are in fact, I suppose, adequate arguments in terms of seeming legitimate. And I think it's almost less sometimes. The weird thing is, I think the Debates Commission kind of gets why having the Rebel there might be inconsistent with the commission's own principles, but they've so far had a lot of trouble convincing courts that that's the case. And I feel like that's sort of almost where they've run up against. So once again, they won, for 2 years, 2 cycles in a row, they attempted to keep the Rebel out based on different sets of criteria. But judges disagreed. And I think it's a reasonable question. Like, would the judge in 2021 have said there was no harm in letting them in if they'd known that they would, take up a arguably disproportionate amount of space? In this case, however, there was also the issue of the Debates Commission seemingly being unaware of the fact that the Rebel, this election cycle, has in fact registered, or at least appears in the Elections Canada database as itself a third-party organization, as well as a separate organization called For Canada, registered by Ezra as a third-party organization engaging in partisan activity in the election. and that spends tens of thousands, I think, per their own statements that are posted on the Elections Canada website. For Canada has spent tens of thousands of dollars on giving money to the rebel media for election advertising, which is, but as well as partisan activity. Like that's something that they pay the rebel for. And so I think, I mean, the the debates commissioner, I think, was confronted on CBC Live by this and about this, and seemed caught off guard by it. And so that's like, it may not even be the biggest screw up by the debates commission this election, or the weirdest decision they've made, but it definitely lends to the idea that they don't know, they're not really as in charge of this as they think they are. And it's just sort of another, there's a lot of real questions about the organization's credibility. And once again, I feel like I do give them credit because they've sort of tried, but as soon as they've gone to court, it's just, things have not gone their way. And as I think, yes, the commissioner told, David Cochrane as well, like he was given the advice that, like, yeah, you're not going to win this. Don't fight this one. So this
has been so good. A real deep dive into the barnyard antics, which is like defacing the scrum after the French leaders debate. Luke, anything else to add? And then I want to bring in the rest of the team to kind of begin our wrap up. But anything else you wanted to speak about on this issue with Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's interesting, right? Because I think that you tend to hear a lot of people, the criticism of rebel media is they'll say, well, they're not journalists, and they question the legitimacy of rebel media as a journalistic organization. And, I think that's a bit of a dead end argument because it just raises this bigger philosophical question of who is a journalist, and it really leads nowhere. You don't want to get into that debate. But I think what we saw tonight and last night kind of, in my mind, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, and then Jonathan, you can add your thoughts afterwards. But I kind of think that what we saw tonight, where there was an actual, I guess, security incident is the phrasing that they used. The event was disrupted. It actually led to questions getting shut down, so other journalists weren't able to do their duty and ask questions of elected leaders. And then last night, where they just monopolized the entire thing and kind of took over. I mean, dominated, maybe a strong word, but a third of the questions all went to these outlets that are asking questions that are just completely irrelevant to what actually happened in the debate. So I guess, Jonathan, do you think that, what's your takeaway from that about what this shows about in terms of the threat to democracy, or at least why these outlets are problematic in terms of democracy? What's your takeaway from that?
I mean, I do think it's reasonable to have a question about what journalism is and whether given certain people are journalists. I don't think you're going to reach an easy or satisfying answer. And I think the attempts to regulate that are problematic. But I think that blurring of it certainly speaks to that blurring of the line of, I think, and confusion of these ideas, confusion in the minds of the public of what is a journalist, what distinguishes a journalist, what do journalists do, who are journalists, and it creates this confusion because even if Ezra Levant and the people who work for him earnestly and honestly and sincerely believe that they are journalists doing journalism, I think that creates a very, very different impression of what journalism is in the minds of people who follow them or are even vaguely aware of them. And it certainly reinforces certain ideas about what journalists get up to, what journalists do or don't do. I mean, there are journalists who don't even vote because they believe that would, that would compromise them or something they don't want to have to think about. I mean, I personally believe that that's excessive caution, but I mean, journalists, to the extent that there's any one thing that I think is common among the practice of journalism, it's trying to do things with a genuine commitment to principles of accuracy and fairness, and those more than anything else, and maybe also just a sense of just general responsibility of what does it mean to publish something about someone and put that into the world. And you can't judge what someone's subjective idea of accuracy or fairness is, but I think it's less about getting a point across. It's less about point scoring. I'll put it that way. And I think for organizations like the Rebel, which in my view, my long-standing view has been that it is more of an advocacy organization that takes advantage of the tropes of journalism and the trappings of journalism to lend itself legitimacy, which potentially is a legitimate advocacy tactic. That definitely, certainly increasingly muddles the idea of, what is journalism? What are journalists? Are journalists really just a particular flavor of activist? And I mean, activist journalists are a thing, and that's a legitimate practice itself. But on the whole, that's not what journalism is or is about. It's not about being a political actor. It is about pushing things forward, but that's a tricky nuance to explain, and it's not something that I think most people do grasp or could reasonably be expected to grasp. And I also don't think that journalists like mainstream journalistic organizations, as much as they've tried and taken pains to explain this, I don't think it's very effective when they do that.
So this is not a conversation that you would find on a lot of no, it's great. This isn't a conversation you'd find on a lot of other streams, because the kind of work that Press Progress does is so deeply invested in journalism. And like, to me, because I know the team, it's just like, these guys are such nerds for journalism, and I mean that like so affectionately. But like, really diving into a larger context for what happened last night is really, really interesting. And I also think it's appropriate that after 10 p.m. here on the East Coast, we're telling spooky stories about the specter of rebel haunting Canadian media. And that's where we're at in 2025 in this election. I'm bringing in the rest of the team. Eric Wickham is probably sleeping right now, like most people on the East Coast should be.
It's past Eric's bedtime.
Yes, it is. Welcome back to Stephen Magusiak in Calgary, Emma Arkell in Vancouver, and Romy Garrido, Press Progress publisher and producer of this live stream in Calgary. And to wrap, you guys, let's just do like a real quick round the table, round the table thing, where I'm just curious about a final thought. And this is corny, but where does the campaign go from here? And let's begin with Emma. Let's go west to east. Emma, where do you think the campaign goes from here?
I hope it goes towards actual policy proposals and platform releases. Really interested to see the details of what the parties have been talking about for the past few weeks in largely vague terms.
Thank you. Over to Stephen Magusiak in Calgary. You're on mute though, Stephen, but I'm so curious about your final thoughts. Where does the campaign go from here?
Just going ahead and hitting that unmute button. I if I'm being real, I just hope the NDP can hold on to what it has and hold on to a position of power. I really want to weigh in onto the excessive caution and the journalism discretion, but I don't know if that's where we're at right now. So,
you know what, that could be something to follow up to in your award-winning podcast, Press Progress Sources.
Yeah, let's move on.
To Romy Garrido, probably just a few neighborhoods away, which is probably like 8 kilometers away because Calgary's so big. Romy, what are your final thoughts? Where do you see the campaign going from here?
Sorry about that. Some technical issues. The sad thing about Calgary is that actually I think Stephen and I are in the same neighborhood, but we're still 8 kilometers away. So that all said, I think where the campaign goes from here, I think having several parties is healthy for democracy. So I would like to see most of them holding on to some form of power because it means that they're able to hold each other accountable. I liked seeing in the debate tonight, just like a bit of sparring and a bit of holding each other to account just across all party lines. And so I think that's necessary moving forward, not just in the debates.
Jonathan Goldsbie, where's the campaign go from here?
I think we get 24 hours of the conversation, or at least the online conversation, being dominated by Talk of the Rebel, and then hopefully that is the end of Talk of the Rebel in the context of this campaign for the duration of the campaign, and then we just tumble toward election day and a result that seems increasingly inevitable, and that will lead to questions about, well, what could the NDP have done differently, and how will it rebuild, how could it rebuild, and how could it take a different approach from whatever it was that led to its seeming near destruction.
And just to tease a small thing before we get to Luke, in June we're hosting a progressive public symposium in Calgary where Magusiak and Romy are going to be participating. And on the Friday night live show that we're doing at the Legion, which is the birthplace of the CCF back in 1930 whatever, the Alberta Advantage is leading that live show, and I think the topic they're going to be seizing on is NDP imaginary realities and like imagining an NDP of the future, since we're going to be in system shock after the election. But final thought to editor Luke LeBrun in Ottawa. Luke, off mute if that's okay.
Okay. I think that I will answer that question in the reverse of what Emma said. I think there will not be policy because Mark Carney is running a front runner campaign, and what incentive does he have to start talking about policy when right now all he has to do is just remain as boring as possible, not rock the boat, and that he will achieve his objective, I think, if he does that. So I mean, I guess I do wonder, for one thing, have the other parties really done an effective job of trying to get Carney on the record taking positions on different things? Because he hasn't released a platform. For the most part, he's just kind of gotten by on, vague sort of, giving the vision of where he's going to go, also running on his CV. I don't fault him for that. I think that's actually probably a pretty smart thing to do if I were Mark Carney, and it's working for him. So, that is what it is. But, I mean, I guess to go back to Emma's point, how can we complicate this election and actually, demonstrate that there are issues here where there is difference between the different parties?
Thank you, Luke. And thank you, everyone, for checking into this. You've been watching the Press Progress Federal Leaders Debate 2025 live stream show with your PressProgress.ca news team, Luke LeBrun in Ottawa, Stephen Magusiak in Calgary, Eric Wickham in Toronto, Emma Arkell in Vancouver, and guests Ricardo Acuña in Edmonton, Arshy Mann and Jonathan Goldsbie in Toronto, and Savannah Stewart and Claire Ross in Montreal. And super special thanks to Press Progress publisher and co-producer of tonight's live stream, Romy Garrido in Calgary. Romy, you were a superstar. Thank you. Sign up for the Press Progress newsletter and support their investigative journalism work at PressProgress.ca, and subscribe to the Press Progress Sources podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and at Canada's progressive podcast community, HarbingerMediaNetwork.com. And you can find the great work from the Rover, Pivot, The Breach, The Maple, La Converse, Étoile du Nord, Press Progress, and 20 other publishers at the progressive journalism aggregation community, unrig.ca. Go bookmark it right now. I'm Unrig Community Director and Harbinger Executive Director Andre Goulet in Montreal. I'm legally obligated to remind you that early voting starts tomorrow. Find your neighborhood polling station at elections.ca. Thanks a lot for being part of the inaugural Press Progress live stream. Take care and talk to you soon.